Hello, my name is Leah Holliday, and I'd like to welcome you to my presentation on Nazi cultural policy, a reevaluation of art and race through propaganda. I hope you find this presentation interesting, and I welcome your feedback, questions, or concerns at the end. Thank you for joining me, and now let's get started. This video is going to be a presentation of my thesis in which I focus on Nazi German propaganda. I explore how the Nazis used the modernist art, as they labeled degenerate art, to disguise their racist agenda. They used the modernist art, they conflated the modernist art with a contaminative aesthetic, a focus on the other and foreign, filth, decay, these ideas that would be a threat to the people, instead of focusing on the expressive qualities of modernist art, which would create self-reflection and critical thinking. They wanted critical thinking removed because that way they were better able to carry on their destructive racist agenda. In his book, Nations and Nationalism Since 1780, the social historian E.J. Hobsbawm explores the conditions necessary for a nationalistic country to gather the force it needs to be a totalitarian regime. And Germany post-World War I was exactly that environment. They were effectively damaged emotionally, physically, and financially after the significant losses after World War I. The country was in ruins and the conditions were hopeless. It was the right formula for someone to come along, someone who's charismatic and who can lead their people, even in an aggressive way, to hopes of a better future, of maybe more utopian future. And the clear way, the clear path to that is by focusing on a common enemy. And in post-World War I Germany, the effectiveness of the common enemy was a racist agenda. This paper will explore the means of the common enemy, how effective it was in their propaganda efforts. Before we explore Nazi propaganda posters, let's review the themes that we will see throughout their propaganda posters as well as their propaganda art. They focus on leadership and the glorification of war and hero and strength, certain solidarity, which underscores their tribal culture and exclusion of non-Aryans. Either you are inside and part of the group or you are out, and they will do what they need to do to make sure that the outsiders stay outside. They promise a utopian future, a continued belief in a world that it would be perfect with a pure race, and they use consumerism as a distraction for mass destruction. The Nazis' propaganda methods were seemingly limitless. They permeated everything from radio to speech, military action, education, film, posters, architecture, and art. This is an example of Nazi propaganda poster. It's called Down with the Jewish Bargaining Spirit from 1939. This poster says, Bruckel says the honest merchant is a servant of the people. He who charges excessive prices is an enemy of the people. Good products, fixed prices. Higher sales, less exploitation. No hoarding or dumping prices. No borrowing, no worries. Clear bills, good friend. The adjacent poster has a more direct anti-Semitic message, down with the Jewish bargaining spirit. The juxtaposition of these ideologies, that the good merchant equals good German people and the bad merchant equals corrupt Jew, propagates the unfounded belief that Jews were a menace to the common folk. This poster reads, Before and Today. Before, unemployment, hopelessness, desolation, strikes, lockouts. Today, work, joy, discipline, camaraderie. Give the Führer your vote. In the foreground of the poster, the viewer is confronted with a uniformed worker wearing a Nazi swastika and holding a working peasant's shovel. You see, he stands tall and proud. He is an ideal of Aryan strength and discipline. This man represents the today. He symbolizes the new and prosperous Nazi Germany. In contrast, in the background, you see desperate men who are protesting their situation. These images are obscured by an angry, hot red wash. This red exacerbates their discontented position and contrasts to the cool gray tones of the proud man in the foreground. While the man in the foreground wears a smart uniform, the men in the background, they are wearing ragged clothes, and their signs indicate that they are unhappy, or perhaps they are dissatisfied and or unemployed. You see in the left-hand corner, one man sits on a public bench, and he cradles his head in his arms. His rejected posture and demeanor communicates his desperation. These men, the men in the background, represent the Germany of before. The contrast between the hardships of the past, or the pre-Nazi regime, to the alleged success and strength of Germany now, clearly supports Hitler's ideologies and politics. By giving Hitler a vote, this will ensure that he will continue to lead Germany towards an even stronger and more powerful future. This poster was issued just prior to the 1936 referendum, and that vote would eventually guarantee complete Nazi control over German parliament. Therefore, it confirms that their propaganda campaign was highly successful. The anti-modernist racist propaganda was well in place even before the degenerate art exhibit. Through propaganda techniques using photography, the Nazi elite made the destructive connection between degenerate, race, and modernist art. They focused on themes like filth, decay, foreign, and other, and the Jewish race. These themes were deliberately and consistently highlighted and conflated through the Nazi regime. This slide of Nazi propaganda contrasted modernist art with its emphasis on the expressive and subversive with scientific photographs of the insane, the deformed, and the foreign. All of these were labeled as degenerate. By examining the juxtaposition of the scientific photography to modernist art in Paul Schultz-Naumburg's Art and Race from 1928, one can identify the racist and destructive results of the Nazi propaganda technique. To your left are portraits by Carl Schmidt-Rudloff and Amedeo Modigliani. These portraits of men and women are expressive, capturing the unique interior of the individuals. The portraits suggest real human emotions like pain and doubt, sorrow, confusion, expressions of people being and feeling like people. This type of art, portraits that suggest interior complexities and self-reflection, were considered kryptonite for the Nazi regime. The modernist portraits encourage the viewer to think critically about themselves as well as the world around them. For the Nazis to successfully oppress and control the common people, they needed to eradicate this type of individualist thinking. By contrasting the modernist portraits to scientific photos of real people with severe deformities, the Nazis attempted to make the connection between the deformative tendencies of modernist artists and what was at stake for the German Volk, what they thought was the potential contamination of their own pure Aryan race. By juxtaposing the expressive modernist portraits with scientific photos, the art loses its special artistic aura. It no longer is connected to that artistic realm of creativity and expression. Instead, it becomes just another documentation of deformative and potentially threatening pathological human conditions. To better grasp the extent of the racist anti-modernist agenda, it's necessary to carefully explore the art of the Great German Art Show, which itself was a propaganda act. The Great German Art Show featured art that was demonstrative of the Nazi aesthetic, an aesthetic that focused on clean proportions, ideals, an Aryan Nordic prototype, and it harkens back to the sculptures of the ancient civilizations of Greek and Rome. Hitler's favorite sculptor, his name was Arno Breker, embraces these qualities in all of his sculptures. We're going to be looking at two of them. Partei, a Wehrmacht from 1936. Brecker's sculptures are enormous. They literally loom over the viewer. Their bodies are smooth, clean, and ideal, with their narrow torsos and their broad shoulders. They are the epitome of youth, strength, and determination. They are mascots for Nazi ideals. Partei is on your left. Partei means party, and on your right is Wehrmacht. Wehrmacht are the combination of the German armed forces together. Together they communicate the power and the spirit of Nazi Germany. These sculptures glorify racial purity, and they link the Nazi power to the power and glory of Hitler's fantasy, an Aryan ideal based on Greek and Roman classical sculpture. These good German art sculptures are completely in contrast to the modernist art that was featured at the Degenerate Art Show. These were advertisements for the ideology of the Nazi regime. They promoted racial purity to the working class German audience. We will explore the non-ideal quality of modernist art next by contrasting it to these idealized figures of the great German art. The modernist art exhibit, otherwise known as the Degenerate Art exhibit, emphasized all that was not ideal. The Nazis deliberately emphasized this non-ideal quality of modernist art by contrasting it to the idealist figures of the great German art show. This is Wilhelm Lembruck's The Fallen Man from 1915. It represents all that the Nazis despised in art and the other. Lembruck's male nude crawls on his hands and his knees in desperation. His isolation and hopelessness is visceral as we can see his bent-over body, his head plunged heavily into the earth. He seems so vulnerable and fragile, expressing anguish from deep down in his soul. The fallen man represents every man at some point as he repeatedly endures the complexities and hardships of life. Whether the viewer is male or female is really of no concern, because grief is not an issue of gender. Everyone can identify and empathize with the fallen man's desperation. He embodies the exact opposite of Brecker's idealized and glorified sculptures, who are pillars of pride, determination, and strength. On the contrary, the fallen man reflects the fragility of humanity. He represents the weak, the frail, and the other. Therefore, based on the ideology of the Nazis, he is degenerate and a threat to the purity and strength of the German Volk. The fallen man's thin, narrow, and sensitive body informs the question of racial aesthetic assessment that has nothing to do with art criticism. By comparing him to the idealized indifference of Partei et Wehrmacht, his weakness was easily communicated and manipulated into a physical and mental assessment of inferior people. Often, scholars, for example, Hal Foster in his article 1937a, may address the Degenerate Art exhibit as a direct result of the Nazi regime's uneducated misunderstanding, or even an underappreciation of modernist art, but that really isn't the reality. Based on his expressive subversive modernist tendencies, the Nazis labeled Lembruck and other modernist artists as degenerate and decadent. The motivations for defaming the modernist artists was not a question of artistic expression, but rather a concern with the aesthetics of race and politics. Were the Nazis successful with their propaganda and why? My research shows that yes, they were very successful. In fact, their form of propaganda was unprecedented in history before and has been a model of propaganda since. For them, for the Nazis, art wasn't about self-expression. It was a tool to use as propaganda to remove critical thinking from their people. By removing critical thinking from the masses, they were able to move forward with their destructive agenda. I hope you enjoyed my presentation today on Nazi propaganda. I learned a lot through my research, and it demonstrated to me the connection between art, politics, and race. Going forward with research, I hope that scholars will continue to explore modernist art and its effect on culture, and as well as the effect of politics on art. Thank you very much.